Incident Report, June 2023 HashiCorp Cloud Platform Outage, a DevOps Postmortem. It's Tuesday morning, June 13th, around 10 a.m. PT. You're sitting in your chair when the monitors start screaming not just one alert, but a cascade of them hitting every major offering on the HashiCorp Cloud Platform. Suddenly, HCP Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer are all starting to wobble under a wave of intermittent connectivity errors across multiple regions. This isn't a minor hiccup. It's a foundational collapse of the infrastructure people rely on to manage their secrets and networks. For the next several hours, the core is effectively melting down, leaving thousands of users staring at spinning icons or flat-out service unavailability. By the time the sun sets that day, only some services have begun to recover, but the real nightmare is still unfolding. The scale of the disruption is massive, and for anyone relying on these tools, the silence from the network feels like a ticking clock. Something deep in the plumbing has broken. Imagine you're running a massive infrastructure where security, secrets, and networking are the backbone of your entire operation. That is exactly what the HashiCorp Cloud Platform provides. It's the heavy machinery behind tools like Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer. When these systems go down, the gears of modern IT grind to a halt because companies can't manage their identities or connect their services. On June 13, 2023, at 10:00 a.m. PT, this foundational layer started to buckle under a botched network configuration. It wasn't just a minor hiccup. It triggered intermittent connectivity and total service unavailability across multiple regions. For several days, the source of truth for these critical services became unreliable. By the time things were fully stabilized on June 16, everyone involved had learned a painful lesson about how one small change in core networking can bring an entire ecosystem to its knees. It started like any other Tuesday in the cloud, quiet, predictable, and humming along with the usual rhythm of production traffic. For teams relying on the HashiCorp Cloud Platform, systems like Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer were the backbone of their operations across multiple regions. Everything looked green on the dashboards until the clock hit 10:10 a.m. PT on June 13, 2023. That's when the first whispers of degradation began to crawl through the logs. It wasn't an immediate total blackout. It was a creeping instability triggered by a single, catastrophic configuration change to a core networking component. To the engineers on the front lines, it might have felt like a ghost in the machine at first, but that bug was quietly poisoning the connectivity for everyone. By the time the intermittent issues turned into full-service unavailability, the storm hadn't just arrived, it had already taken hold. It started on the morning of June 13, 2023. At exactly 10 a.m. PT, the first tremors hit the system, a steady degradation across multiple HCP offerings like Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer. It wasn't an instantaneous, lights-out moment. It was more of a slow poison leaking into the network layer. Engineers watching the dashboard saw connection stability start to fray as a faulty configuration change in a core networking component began its work. For those on the front lines, the telemetry showed a messy reality. Some users faced flickering connectivity, while others saw their services go dark entirely across multiple regions. The alarms weren't just screaming about a single server failing. They were signaling a systemic breakdown of the underlying fabric connecting these platforms. By that first hour, it was clear this wasn't a fluke. Something fundamental had broken in how the traffic was moving. It started as a whisper in the logs, a subtle degradation of services across the entire HashiCorp Cloud Platform landscape. At 10 a.m. PT on June 13th, what looked like a localized hiccup quickly mutated into a full-scale, systemic collapse. Because the flaw lived deep within a core networking component, it didn't just hit one app. It acted like a poison in the water supply. HCP, Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer all began to choke simultaneously as the faulty configuration propagated through the infrastructure. Connectivity became a coin toss. with some users seeing intermittent drops while others faced total blackouts across multiple regions. By the time the team realized the scope was this massive, the cascade had already locked down vital tools for dozens of organizations. It wasn't just a bug anymore. It was a multi-day siege that wouldn't let up until the offending network config was finally rolled back at 6 p.m. PT that same day. So, what actually broke the gears? It wasn't some phantom ghost in the machine. It was a classic case of one small turn of the wrench breaks the entire engine. A specific configuration change was pushed to a core networking component within the platform's backbone. This single update introduced a fundamental bug into the routing logic, creating a butterfly effect that crippled how traffic moved through the system. Instead of seamless flow, the network became unpredictable, manifesting as those agonizingly inconsistent connection drops we saw across HCP Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer. By the time engineers realized the scope on June 13th at 10:00 a.m. PT, the faulty config had already turned the infrastructure into a minefield. The failure mode wasn't just a slow crawl, it was an outright breakdown of connectivity, because the underlying network instructions were literally contradicting themselves. One bad line of code, one wrong setting, and suddenly the doors were locked for everyone. When the blast radius hit on June 13, it didn't just tickle a single corner of the house. It blew the front door off the hinges for the entire HashiCorp Cloud Platform. This wasn't some localized glitch, it was a widespread failure, hitting HCP Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer across multiple regions simultaneously. From the initial degradation at 10:00 a.m. PT until the full resolution on June 16, users weren't just seeing slow pages. They were staring down intermittent connectivity and total service unavailability. For those 3 days, the core infrastructure that thousands of teams rely on to manage secrets and networking became a ghost town. It's one thing to have a bug in a minor feature, but when your primary cloud offerings go dark like this, you aren't just losing uptime, you're paralyzing the operations of every customer caught in the crossfire. By 10:00 a.m. PT on June 13th, the alarms started screaming as performance degraded across the entire HashiCorp Cloud Platform. It wasn't just one niche tool failing. HCP Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer were all taking hits simultaneously. The team scrambled to find out why our backbone was crumbling under what looked like an intermittent connection nightmare. They weren't fighting ghosts, they were hunting a specific, botched configuration change in a core networking component that had poisoned the well. For hours, they battled through the chaos of service unavailable errors trying to isolate the blast radius. Finally, at 6:00 p.m. PT that same day, they identified the culprit and rolled back the faulty config. While things began to stabilize then, it took until June 16th for every single service to be fully restored and settled into a stable state. It was a grueling 48-hour marathon against a broken network. By the time we hit the ground on June 13th, at 6 p.m. PT, the atmosphere in the war room was heavy with the realization that our optimization had turned into a catastrophe. The fix wasn't some complex architectural masterpiece. It was the brutal, honest act of rolling back the botched configuration change to the core networking component. That single rollback started the slow climb toward stability, finally bringing the HCP Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer services back into the fold, but just rolling it back wouldn't stop the next person from making the same mistake. To ensure this ghost didn't haunt us again, the team overhauled the change management process for all critical infrastructure. We didn't just patch the code. We baked in additional layers of validation and rigorous testing for every network update moving forward. By June 16, everything was stabilized, but the real win was the new safety net we built around those pipes. Look, we've all been in those rooms where the air gets heavy because a single config tweak turned into a multi-day nightmare. The takeaway here isn't just, be more careful. It's about building a fortress around your core networking components. When that one flawed update hit on June 13th at 10:00 a.m. PT, It didn't just glitch, it crippled HCP Consul, Vault, Boundary, and Packer across multiple regions simultaneously. That kind of blast radius happens when you trust a manual change too much without automated guardrails. To survive this in the wild, you have to bake rigorous validation into every network shift before it touches production. We need tighter change management and faster telemetry to catch these spikes before they linger until the next day. If you can't see the fire starting instantly, you're just waiting for the smoke to choke everyone out. Build the gates high enough so one bad line of code can't take down the whole kingdom. That's how HashiCorp turned a very bad day into a lesson. If this saved you an outage, subscribe for the next postmortem.